All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Lindenwood. We have with us a guest today who's going to be talking about Chapter 4 of Pope Francis's encyclical from 2015, Laudato Si. Thank you. The chapter on integral ecology, as you guys have heard, this has kind of become our new focus here at the center. And we wanted to have educational opportunities so we can continue to explore that idea as it's new for a lot of us. So I'm going to introduce Cheryl and get out of the way and let her continue on. So Cheryl Meyer studied at Ball State University where she earned a BS in biology and a master's in natural resources. She taught biology and environmental science at Anderson Highland High School for 31 years and was a founding member of the White River Watchers, the Red Tail Land Conservancy, and Heart of the River. She writes a column called On Nature for the Herald Bulletin in Anderson. Cheryl was a naturalist for the Anderson Department of Parks and Recreation and coordinated a Science Kids summer camp in 2010. She served as a seasonal naturalist at Mountain State Park. She serves on the board of directors for the Red Tail Land Conservancy, which is a land trust that serves East Central Indiana. So please give Cheryl a warm Senator Donaldson welcome.
Can you hear me? Yes, ma'am. I think the little thing fell off. There it is. I'm wearing my collar up so that the microphone is there. There, how's that? Okay. It's not that cold in here, really. It is such a pleasure to be here from Anderson today. It was about a 2.5-hour drive of meandering through the country, and I have to say I wasn't prepared for Lindenwood. It's just beautiful. You're all very fortunate to be here, in my opinion. You're doing some wonderful things with green technologies and campus practice, which I'd like to see transported where I live. That'd be nice. We're working on it. But I just want to congratulate you for everything you are doing, the steps you are making. My local park is Mounds. It's just about 13 minutes from my house. And it's a special place because 2,000 years ago, people thought it was special, too. So special that they built a great mound which is larger in diameter than a football field is long. It's enormous. How many of you have been to mounds and seen our mounds? They're earthworks that are now just sort of a fraction of the size they once were. But there were a complex of mounds, maybe as many as 15. Some of them are gone now, but it's one of the special places in my part of the world that I would invite you to go see sometime. When I read this book several years ago, it was a gift from a friend of mine. I was deeply encouraged to know that the leader of the Catholic Church saw the importance of addressing environmental issues and decided to really make it a priority. And so, on my own, I did a PowerPoint on each chapter and presented it to my local church, and they liked it, and I thought, I just don't want this PowerPoint to go to waste. And I called Sister Joetta at the Pope John 23rd Institute, and she was very kind and said, well, we're interested in that topic, and we invite you to come. So that's how I got here. I'm used to the classroom. Teenagers, they can be a challenge, but they can be wonderful too. And we did a lot of outdoor education. A lot. And I think I just fell in love with the natural world from a young age. Maybe some of you know the Barbie Lakes in Kosciuszko County. And we had a little place in Seacrest. And while everybody else was skiing, I was doing field trips, looking at turtles and birds and fish. And I see today, in 2019, I see our entire ecosystem under threat. That makes me deeply sad. But the sad thing is, we don't even realize that we're doing it. I don't think most people understand the impact of our decision making. And I have some examples and then I'll be showing you. It's sort of like being on that lake and you're on a raft or you're fishing and a skier goes by and the wake just goes like this and it rocks your boat and it erodes the shoreline, and that's what we're doing. That's what the human species is doing in the natural world. We're zooming around, creating a wake that is absolutely interfering with the life of most of the other creatures here and the natural communities that are here. So we're not going to turn this around this morning at all. I know that. But what I hope to do is just bring a little bit of insight into our decision making every day. It's even as simple as, well, at McDonald's, am I going to get 2 napkins when I only need 1? Oh, I'll just grab a handful. That's what I'm talking about. I do it. I do all these things myself, and without really even thinking twice. I'm on a campaign now of not taking plastic in the grocery. Even if I forget my bags in the car, I say just put it in the cart. I'll bag it up in my car. And most people go, but they're getting to know me now. So. I wish I had deep pockets. I would give you all a reusable shopping bag to take with you everywhere. And if you're not, that's one little thing you could do. They're going to outlaw them eventually, the plastic bags. But what I'll do first is just run through a little quick introduction to chapter 4, a summary, if you will. And the Pope, our Francis, I think of him as my Pope as well. He doesn't pretend to be a scientist, but he does have a very high regard for scientists. And that's commendable. I'm sorry to say that in 2019, a lot of people view scientific effort with a great deal of skepticism. And I think it's because a lot of people don't understand the process of science. It's not one guy out there to prove something. It's a whole worldwide web of scientific thinking, and if you discover something that you put out on the web, there's feedback from all over the world. It's not like a conspiracy. Anyway. It's too big. This chapter 4, is about human ecology. In it, the Pope advocates for the common good and the dignity of every individual. And this is just an overview. These people are looking at the sand on the bottom of a river to see what kind of organisms live there, because depending on what you find, you can tell how healthy the stream is. Ecology is the study of the relationships of living things to each other and to their environments. Organisms don't exist apart from their relationships. Individuals exist in community, or they don't exist at all. There's no such thing as an individual. We may think we're an individual human. Do you know how many species of bacteria and fungi live on our body? And in our hair, and on our skin, and even in our gut, in our intestine. If it weren't for the bacteria that live there, we wouldn't be able to absorb the nutrients of the food we eat. So we're not an individual, we're an ecosystem. Each human body is its own ecosystem, as a matter of fact. So, it cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. It is helpful, and I think essential, to the human spirit to set aside some places that can be preserved and protected from constant change brought about by human intervention. Often, and this happened in my little town, funding for public parks is seen as frivolous. When there's an economic downturn and a budget crunch, parks are gone. Or they're not zeroed out, but they just reach into the park funds and use it for other things. And I can show you some depressing pictures of crumbling parks, but I won't do it. In my little town of Anderson. You may know Anderson was a big automobile industry place back in the 1970s. We employed 30,000 people in Anderson in every aspect of the automobile industry. Today, zero. They're gone. And Anderson really is struggling for their tax base isn't what it used to be. So I would argue you can't cut parks. That's where people go to recreate and have some peace. Francis points out that poverty and environmental degradation are linked. Right now in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a horrendous drought. It's been going on for years. And when animals are grazing on this sparse vegetation, it doesn't take much to turn that into a desert. Not much at all. This happened again, even since I did the slideshow. In Brazil, where they don't have strong environmental protection, mining industries can take their wastewater and just put it in a pond with a weak dam around it. Or they can dam the river to do mining behind the dam, and then the dam breaks. Well, this is what happens. And they don't have insurance. They can't call State Farm. This is it for the folks that live there. So, environmental protection. Oh, did I drop this? Oh, thank you. I have a guardian angel. Francis says that we as believers should be concerned with the dignity of the poorest among us and should reject the attitude that any individual or group is expendable. We should be indignant at the enormous inequalities in our midst. Just as the individual depends on the larger group for survival, the group depends on the contributions of each member for its survival. I chose that pod of killer whales, and by the way, they're not whales, they're dolphins, but everybody calls them whales, so call them whales. This pod exists in the San Juan Islands up to this. It's just not going to stay on up here. I'll just hold it. How's that?
There you go.
I'll just hold it. It's easier. The healthy killer whales have their dorsal fin stands straight up. And there's a male in the front and a male in the back, and the females and the babies are in the middle. This looks like a pod of maybe young juvenile males. They have a bigger fin. But when they're not healthy, the fin falls over like this. And in captivity, a lot of times, that's what their dorsal looks like. Because it's just not where they are choosing to be. Francis believes that ecology also involves protecting the cultural treasures of humanity. Not just the living things, but the cultural treasures. A consumerist vision of human beings serves to level cultures and destroy the qualities that make each one unique. Here's a story. I got to go to Japan with a group of educators on the Fulbright program, and we went to look at education in Japan. Their food is so healthy compared to ours. For breakfast, they'll have maybe fish, vegetables. And so we were treated to this spread, this beautiful buffet for breakfast every morning. And there were a group of teachers that went to the McDonald's on the ground level of the hotel for breakfast every day. McDonald's compared to this magnificent Japanese cuisine, there was just no comparison. But Walmart's and McDonald's, they're invading the world, like an introduced species, sort of. I'm just saying. Noise and ugliness make it difficult for a person to feel integrated and happy. That's Detroit. That's LA. I forget which one where that was. But the good news is, some individuals are able to orient their lives amid disorder and chaos. Any place can turn from being a hell on earth into the setting for a dignified life, says Francis. Yeah, true. The disappearance of culture can be more serious than the extinction of a species, according to our Pope. All through New England and the Atlantic coast of Canada, little fishing villages like this are just going away. The catch in the commercial fishing industry is plummeting. 16 of the 21 commercial fisheries are in deep trouble or they're gone. So what's a young man or woman to do in this village that's livelihood is going away? Some believe that we have entered the Anthropocene epoch, that humans have become a geological force capable of influencing the natural environment on a planetary scale. I think it's true. This is Beijing, the biggest city in the world, 25 million-ish. So I think or more. I haven't checked. Many problems of today are connected with our self-centered culture of instant gratification. Yeah, I mean, I'm not criticizing. I do it myself. I'm in a line at the grocery to pay for something, and the person in front of me is taking so long with all their coupons. But that's good spiritual practice, to practice patience in some of the many lines that we find ourselves in. We are sort of instant gratification culture. Now, okay, we're going to play a game. Your team are the people at your table. Your team. Okay. And I'm meant to have paper. Does everybody have a piece of paper, at least one piece of paper at their table? Good. So you guys are good, and you guys are good. So this is team building. Okay, now I belong to a trivia team. We play trivia every Tuesday, and it is so much fun. So this is going to be a little modified environmental trivia. So one person can write down the answers. You can all talk about these. You don't want the other team to hear, and I have prizes. So, no, I've got 5 more after these 5. So the team that gets the most right gets a prize. So, go. Number 1. According to the most recent UN estimates, what is the present world population rounded to the nearest 10th of a billion? And we only have about 30 seconds for each answer.
I think India's
We're playing trivia now. This is number 1. The population of the world rounded to the nearest Number 2. The largest hydroelectric, if you don't know it, just put yes. Number 2, the largest hydroelectric dam in the world is the Three Gorges Dam. Which country is it in? We have 30 seconds for each.
Except for
Number 3 is
no Googling.
no Google. Oh, yeah. put your phones away. No, where I play trivia, if they see you with a phone, you're disqualified. Okay. Number 3 is, which country produces more natural gas than any other in the world? This is a surprise. I was And there's a difference between natural gas reserves and actual production. It's not the same. This is, which country is producing the most?
Wyoming's not a country.
Number 4 is a surprise too. I challenge you with this one. Which country in the world has the largest reserves of oil? Surprise. These are both sort of surprise answers. Last question. There are 5 categories of greenhouse gases. I'd like for you to name 2 of them. This is a chance for you to get extra. If you can name all 5 greenhouse gases. This is a speed version.
Carbon monoxide. No, I mean,
You can try to
two
regulate
substances,
it.
but they're both ozone.
Get extra credit for
Let's do dioxide monoxide.
And in about 5 seconds, I'm going to put the next 5 questions in. So, final
There's a
answer.
little bucket up there. Can you just throw it?
Final answers.
Yeah, I mean, where's the rest? Okay. Number 6. Name the agency in the United States which measures and analyzes changes in the climate. They're the climate department. Number 7. Corn. Corn is the major crop grown in the United States. What is the number 1 product that corn is used for?
Or, oh, and what is
And name the beautiful exotic fish with the huge appetite that is invading the Caribbean Sea, eating large numbers of fish hatchlings. And it's a problem. They're spearing this fish. They have fish spearing events. And it's only been there since Katrina. That's when they think it got in there, because the aquarium in New Orleans was totally flooded and everything went out into the ocean.
It's the mahi-mahi. Like, that was so
And our last question is, I'm going to give you some more minutes, but which river took 4 billion years to carve out the Grand Canyon? Yeah, I wanted to make I'm gonna wait until everybody, I'll go back so you can see the other one for a minute. There are the first 5. Now, when you see people later today, don't tell them about this quiz. That's not fair. And these are the last ones. So, with the person with the paper, raise your hand when you're done. I'm taking it. Yeah. So, okay. Are you guys done yet? Or you want to wait? No, we're done. Okay. Now, okay, I'm going to read the answers, and this is what we're playing for you guys. Rocks from Lake Michigan. And these are nice. These are nice worry stickers. You know, you can put them in your pocket. Okay. So, I know, it's so exciting. So, you tell me, what is the does anyone know the population of the world?
Over 7 billion.
7.7 billion. Who came the closest? 1.5. Oh, you've got one so far. 1 point. All right. Which country is the Three Gorges Dam in? I heard you. No.
China? Go ahead.
China. It's on the Yangtze River. Yep.
That's another one.
Okay, our surprise. Which country is producing the most natural gas right now?
Russia.
Close.
U.S.
No, it's not Russia, it's not the U.S. It's Norway.
Oh, okay.
Because of the North Sea. Now, but when you read on, Russia has the biggest reserves of natural gas. And it's becoming rapidly our number 1. It's our number 1 electricity producer right now is natural gas. So, which country has the largest reserves of oil? This table got it, I think. Venezuela. That's why all the excitement about Venezuela. Keep track of how many you're getting. Ooh, the guys in the back. Okay, the greenhouse gases are
Methane.
carbon dioxide, although that's not the biggest, water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and the chlorofluorocarbon group.
Yes.
So you could get 5 points on that.
CFC. Oh, no, we got it.
Okay, for number 6,
Oh, wait.
NOAA. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Division.
See, I said national.
And number 7, what is the number 1 use of corn?
Animal feed. Animal.
Ethanol. So, what is the exotic fish with the huge appetite? Yes, the lionfish. Woo! There's the lionfish. And last, which river? Okay. So, did anybody get? How many? You got 7. 7 points is the one to beat.
We got 5.
You are the winners. No, everybody gets one. Yeah, your pet roast, see? And if that's it. It's got some iron. Next.
The line. I put it on. The best section. Yeah. Did you do that? I just read about
Okay. Let's take a quickie break. If you want to get some coffee or a roll or anything. So, for the rest of our time, I want to go through this PowerPoint, and I may just ask some questions. But anytime you feel moved to say something, I really want you to raise your hand. And a lot of people here to make it a group discussion, but we could give it a try anyway. If you want to sum up integrated ecology, there it is. Everything is connected to everything. Going back to my ski boat analogy, we are creating a wake that we are completely unaware of. And so you can't say we're bad, we're immoral, we're not ethical. We just are not woke to to the effects of our decisions. So let's look at some of these. I've got some stories. Maybe that wasn't the right button. Oh, maybe this way. Ha, it was upside down. Ecology is the study of the relationship of living things to their environment, both living and non-living, the rocks and the air, the water and the soil that make up our environment. And I chose, why would I put this guy in this slide presentation? Because they're one of a whole group of pollinators that seem to be disappearing in spite of our best efforts. Or maybe once again, they're collateral damage. We're using herbicides, pesticides, taking out fence rows to plant more corn without realizing that the pollinators were living there. Ecology is all about understanding human impacts on the planet. Does anyone recognize this? Lake Mead. Lake Mead is one of the lakes out west that they rely on for water supply for 9 states, mostly California. But that white line just indicates how low it is. This was taken several years ago, and they've had record flooding this year, so I'm guessing that it's come way up since then. But reservoirs are a great big open source of evaporating water in a desert, so they're going to lose a lot of water every day just to evaporation. Understanding how people interact with the natural world requires the integration of many different fields of study. This is the Florida Keys, which I'm a diver, and I took students down to the Keys on several occasions. But when I saw the difference between 1990 and when I was there a few years ago, it just sort of broke my heart. The algae is taking over the reefs. There's a lot of coral bleaching. And coral bleaching happens when the water gets too warm for 5 consecutive days or more. And the coral have a little critter that lives inside them called a zooxanthellae. It's a photosynthetic algae. And when the water gets hot, the coral expels them. And then they starve and they turn white. And coral bleaching now is an event that's happening all over the world. The Great Barrier Reef has big swatches of dead coral now from warm water. That's where a lot of the heat from the atmosphere is going, to warm the water. And that's Houston right there. Humans have an outsized effect on all other life forms because of our large brain and technological advances.
rainforests in Indonesia and Borneo are being burned and converted into palm oil plantations at a rapid rate. Now, here's a sad story of unintended consequences. When biofuels earned a lot of popularity a decade or so ago, some people got the idea that we needed more biofuels from palm. And all these rainforests, you guys, are being cut down and burned. At any given day, a swath of rainforest the size of Manhattan is burning up and turned in. It's even to where when you buy junk food, the chips and the stuff that you go buy, they're made in palm oil. If you look at the label and it says palm oil, I try to not buy it, but we do. Mindlessly, we don't realize this. Here's the result. The Borneo orangutan is in the top 5 most endangered animals in the world, because in Borneo we're just burning up their rainforests and turning them into palm oil plantations. This lady works with orphaned orangutans, and I look at this and I think, wonder what he's thinking. I mean, he's homeless. He's a homeless orangutan. We have homeless people, but human activity is creating a lot of homeless wild animals too.
He's thinking, and they think they're smarter than me.
Yeah, that would be a very good caption to that poster. There are orangutans on many different islands. There's Sumatra, they're highly endangered. Borneo. This is what a lot of people don't get, is the thought that human activity could be changing the atmosphere. Well, how could that be happening? It's infinite, it's endless. No, it's not. Our atmosphere isn't even as thin as the skin on an apple. Comparatively. So it only goes up about 9 miles, the troposphere, what we're breathing, 12 miles at the outside, and all the burning fossil fuels in the whole world are belching greenhouse gases into that tiny little layer of atmosphere around the Earth. So we can't convince ourselves that it's not having an effect. I think it defies logic to do that. So I want to show you a couple of graphs and bring some data in to this. This is a growth curve of human population. This is what we call an exponential growth curve. Even when the plague came along, there was just a little dip. But then we discovered antibiotics, and I'm a survivor maybe today because of antibiotics as a child. I was very, very, very sick, and they saved my life. So but now, by 2025, we're on our way to 8 billion people. What's going to stop this curve? Something's going to stop the curve, because no living thing grows at an infinite rate indefinitely. It's a limit to growth. Now, on the left are the total global fossil carbon emissions. When we're burning fossil fuels, which is mainly what we're doing, we're burning stored sunlight. This is heat that was trapped 225 million years ago on this planet that we're now burning. So we've never seen this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere living while we've been living here. And we can find out, going back into the rings of trees, into trapped ice bubbles in glaciers, in stone formations, we can figure out what the historic levels of carbon dioxide have been in the atmosphere. And now, this is what they are now. They're over 400 parts per million now. That's an old graph. So I've heard climate skeptics say, yeah, well, this is a natural cycle. This is a natural Earth cycle. It warms, it cools. We have glaciers, we have thawing. But it's never happened with 8 billion people here. We are not prepared for this. I would argue we're just not prepared for it. This is off the NOAA website, which is a graph of the current level of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide's not the only one. There's water vapor, there's methane, nitrous oxides, and chlorofluorocarbons too, all contributing to this. NASA states with 95% probability that the rate of global warming is accelerating because of human activity, primarily the burning of fossil fuels. Is there any evidence for this wild claim of climate change? Or is it a conspiracy that scientists are hatching up all over the world to get more money for grant research, for more grant money for research? Well, no. The evidence is overwhelming. We're watching temperatures rise. The oceans are warming at a phenomenal rate. The ice sheets are shrinking. Glaciers are retreating. There's not as much snow cover, which means the ground's going to warm faster than snow. Where snow was reflecting light, it's now being absorbed by the ground. Ocean levels are rising. I just broke my heart to read that the Fiji Islands are sinking. Hawaii is sinking. Some of the smaller islands, the Solomon Islands are sinking because it doesn't take much. You guys, Miami is about 10 inches above sea level. And I met a guy on a plane who was from Miami. I said, I just need to ask you, how common are floods where you are? Oh, what, am I going the wrong way? Oh, I don't know. Let's see if I can go back. There it is. So he said, oh yeah, he said, our backyard floods when it doesn't even rain. And it never did before. So Miami knows. I mean, people that live on the coast are pretty aware, I think. Plus, oceans are becoming more acid because carbon dioxide in the atmosphere becomes dissolved in the ocean, and that makes carbonic acid, and that's dissolving the reefs and the shells of mollusks. So, here's another thing. A lot of folks don't really understand the difference between climate and weather, so I want to give you a little quick, short lesson. This is the weather. Yesterday, wind chill here was probably minus 20 yesterday. That's the weather. Not to be confused with the climate. This is a map of plant hardiness, and the zone that we're in it's shifting. We're seeing a longer growing season, more precipitation over an average period of time. So that's climate. Climate is based on measurements that take 30 or 40 years and do a picture of what we see in that time. That's climate. It's a lot bigger thing than just the weather. Weather is part of climate. So let's look at some of these unintended consequences of our wake as our boat goes across the ecosystems of the world. This was Dwight Eisenhower's dream, was to have an interstate highway system across the whole country. And in the 1960s, they were building interstates everywhere. Some of us with gray hair can remember that. when you couldn't get from Louisville to Nashville without going on a little 2-lane road through Corbin. But now, not only do we have interstates, but they're getting to be 3 and 4 and 5 lanes. So, here is a story. Would you raise your hand if you've ever been bitten by a fire ant? Would somebody describe that for us?
Oh, it burns. It burns so badly, and it burns for a long period of time. It's not like you're bitten and it goes away. It can last for hours
Yeah.
and hours.
Yeah, my experience. And it leaves a little pustule, a little white thing of pus. And the fire ants have so much formic acid in their saliva that it burns for hours. So, back in the early 1900s, in Mobile, Alabama, some of the greenhouses started to import these beautiful plants from the rainforest of Brazil. Beautiful. They're probably in some of your houses right now. Philodendron, Schefflera, beautiful plants. But in the soil that was in the pots with the plants came these fire ants. They are not native to the United States. They're from Brazil. So here's where they were introduced. Mobile, Alabama. And now, look at their range now. In 100 years, fire ants have taken over the South. They're invading the West Coast. And if it weren't for our bitter cold winters, they'd be invading us. So that's a good reason. That's a reason to be happy on these really cold days. They are keeping the fire ants out. These guys will not coexist with other ant species. They take over. They kill them. In a flood, floods don't kill fire ants because the workers will link their arms together and make these giant floating mats that just float until the floodwaters go down, and then they start new colonies. They kill people. I read an article about a guy who was coming back from his morning run, and he ran through his backyard, and the ground caved in under his feet from all the fire ant tunnels, and he was swarmed by them, and he died because he was allergic to their bite. So cattle, imagine grazing a herd of black Angus in a field full of fire ant nests. And they don't have any way to get them off their body. So ranchers in these areas have to try to kill them. So then we're putting chemicals into it's just a vicious cycle, you know? Kudzu. Now, if you've ever traveled in the southern U.S., you've seen kudzu. The vine from hell is what they call it, because it can grow a foot a day under the right conditions. It covers houses, it covers power lines, schools, immobile objects. When it was imported from Japan, the whole idea was it was a good soil stabilizer. It reduced erosion because when they were building the interstate especially, they'd come in and do a big road cut, and then they could plant kudzu, and it was vegetated in no time. So this is what I mean by unintended consequences. We were really trying hard to make something ugly beautiful, and that's what happened. And when I went to Japan with that group I referred to earlier, the first plant I saw was kudzu. It does the same thing in Japan, except it does have a few more enemies that'll eat it. In the southern U.S., kudzu has smothered thousands of acres of native plants and is nearly impossible to kill. It's one of our most invasive plant species. And it is in southern Indiana, but I haven't seen it here yet. There's the lionfish. It's a beautiful fish. But it can open its mouth and inhale an entire school of fish fry. Every one of them. And so a lot of our native fish are finding it challenging to reproduce. The lionfish is wiping out a lot of fry and sort of taking over. They're poisonous too. You have to be very careful about spearing them and touching them the wrong way. And they're not very big, maybe a foot long. And how did they get here? Well, when Katrina flooded the Aquarium of the Americas in New Orleans, one theory is they just floated out into the ocean from that. It could also be that amateur aquarium owners just got tired of them and just dumped them. That happens a lot, I'm sorry to say. My river cleanup group a few years ago was picking up tires and junk out of the river, and somebody said, "Is that an alligator?" And it was. We took an alligator out of the White River and put it in a bucket and returned it to the Night Stalker pet store from whence it came. And so he took it back. But it was about 2.5 feet long. This happens all the time, every day. Exotic pets escaping. Look at the, did you guys see this thing that went viral of a guy in Florida whose toilet wouldn't work, and he called the plumber, and they pulled a 15-foot python out of his plumbing. And they are really taking over in the Everglades. It's too late now. I mean, that train left. There's not much we can do. Lionfish, like I said, act like vacuum cleaners, sweeping up massive numbers of fish fry and depleting some reefs of young fish. And they are a major threat. This is the most disturbing. I wrote my last article for the paper about disappearing insects. As a biology teacher, I thought, never in my life will we run out of insects. It never occurred to me that we would live without some of these beautiful and colorful insects. But we're losing flying insects around the world. The groups most affected are the bees, the beetles, and wasps, even dragonflies and damselflies. I personally, informally, can tell you I'm not seeing as many as I used to. This one's the orange one. If you guys notice, there's two kinds of ladybug beetles, the orange ones and the red ones. Well, yeah.
What's the best way to deal with mosquitoes?
Well, we may just be stuck with mosquitoes. I'm reading now that if you feed them diet pills, they get so they're not interested in reproducing. So I just hope we don't. I mean, a lot of living birds and bats do eat mosquitoes. I'm holding out hope that we can develop vaccines against most of the diseases that they carry. I don't know. If we start trying to kill insects, we're going to kill a lot of other things. That's the problem. And the little red ladybugs, and these orange ones too, I think, eat scale insects. And if you're farming ever, you know what scale looks like.
I was just going to say that we don't have, it seems to me, a mosquito problem, because I often walk along the lake, and I think it's because of the dragonflies and the birds that
the swifts and swallows.
Yeah, and the things that are allowed to live here.
Yeah,
they take care of the mosquitoes.
They will if we have enough of them, I think.
Just heard the other day that Notre Dame received, and this is a big difference in the number I'm trying to remember, either a $3 million or a $30 million grant to study mosquitoes and to make them stay 3 feet from a human being. That they want to develop something, that mosquitoes will be able to live in the environment and do what they do, but they would then be repelled from the human body. So there's a study going on.
That's what I mean. We need a mosquito vaccine. I've always heard that garlic pills will help, but they never really help me too much. So let's look at insects for a minute. Do you remember a book called The Little Prince? Some of you might. And this guy lands on the earth, and the first thing he sees is what he thinks everything looks like on the earth. I think it was a snake, wasn't it, the first thing? Or was that later? The Little Prince. Well, if somebody did land on this planet, the first thing they might see would be an insect, because the arthropods are all of the light blue portion of this graph. Most living animals in the world are arthropods, and most arthropods are insects. Everything else, I mean, all of us mammals, we're just a little sliver of that pie. So the Guardian magazine in June of 2018 said, "An insect Armageddon is underway, say many entomologists, the result of a multiple whammy of environmental impacts: pollution, habitat changes, overuse of pesticides, and global warming. It is a decline that could have crucial consequences. They are the little things that run the world," according to the distinguished Harvard biologist Edward O. Wilson. And Edward O. Wilson would be one of a handful of people that I would feel so honored to meet in my lifetime. He's dedicated his life to studying insects, mostly ants. And he's the one that said, "We'll never know how many species of insects are going extinct from burning and cutting the rainforest, because they'll be gone. Some insects live their whole life in a little space of 2 or 3 acres. That's the only place in the world they're found. Little islands, little worlds that we're not intentionally setting out to devastate other life forms, but we're sort of just doing that as collateral damage." So, back to biology, you guys. You thought you'd never have to go back. But the bottom layer of our food pyramid is always the producers, the green plants and algae. The next layer that feed on them are usually the insects. Very small mammals, reptiles, amphibians. And all the way to the top in the world of wildlife rests on those bottom layers of the food pyramid. And if you take out insects, it's going to have a tremendous effect on all the other wildlife that eat them. Fish, amphibians, birds. Think how many birds eat insects, or other arthropods. Pope Francis is asking every one of us to become caretakers of his creation. That's why I really commend what you're doing at Lindenwood, at least it may be in the early stages of showing everyone that there's a different way. There is a different way to live. It isn't easy to find solutions that please everyone. So if we are going to solve the very serious challenges facing our planet, there's a typo up, we'll need to work together. And I hope that in your prayers, you can remember the halls of Congress and all of our political leaders at every level that are going to have to wrestle with these and come to some kind of compromise. Now, in the little time that, well, really, there's a half an hour left if we want to use it. I was going to ask you once again, with your papers, piece of paper, to come up with an exhaustive list of every little thing we can do as an individual to reduce our carbon footprint, to cut back from speeding to maybe idling as we go through the world so that our wake isn't causing so much disturbance. So I'd like for you to just brainstorm. Does anyone need paper? Because I'm hoping you can come up with 25 of these at least. I didn't think about bringing paper. So if I can find you some. Okay, think of things that nobody else has thought of. If your group comes up with something that no one else has, more rocks. More rocks. Well, oh, I heard. Okay, I'm butting in. I heard somebody say conserving water. What I'd like to do is hand the microphone to a spokesperson to read like 3 or 4 of these that you don't think anyone else may have thought of, because they're so out there. So, you're being selected. See if you have these on your list.
Okay, so one of the big ones, I mean, it was more broad, but discern your purchasing decisions. Some examples would be not to buy exotic pets, questioning where the plants that you're purchasing are coming from, buying in bulk, not buying single-use plastics. Let's see, cutting down on your toilet paper use, things like that.
And toilet flushing too.
And toilet flushing. Along those lines, controlling your energy consumption, unplugging electronics when they're not used.
Oh, you got me. Yeah. Yeah.
And trying to, utilize renewables when possible, solar and wind. Recycle, reuse, repurpose. Instead of buying something new, can you repurpose something? Can you restore something? We're talking about clothes, how 80% of clothes end up in the landfill. Can you buy more naturally produced clothes that are meant to last longer, as opposed to ones that are made out of plastic fibers that are going to be thrown away at some point? That was 3.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that was good. I had a thought there. I lost it. That was a great list of repurposing. In Chattanooga, I spent a lot of time there with friends. There is a building that is populated by retirees, a lot of guys that are retired, fix-it types, and you can take any appliance in there that's not working and they'll fix it. Isn't that a neat idea? Now that is something that could be, one day a week, bring it in and we'll put a new cord on it or a new plug, or I've thrown away some perfectly good lamps that I just didn't know how to fix. There's a thought. Okay, someone from this table.
Yeah, we had about 27, 28 different ones, but one of the ones I thought was really good was to shop resale.
Oh yeah, Goodwill. Yeah.
Educating the children first, as simple as turning off the lights, turning off the water, picking up trash. Plant trees and other plants. Be intentional of be aware and intentional of what you're doing, instead of, if you're in a hurry, instead of grabbing the to-go stuff, create or make something. And use cloth diapers.
Yeah, did you hear that? Well, young parent. Oh, that's a good list, especially teaching the kids. I love that one.
When she mentioned use cloth diapers, one thing that really bothers me, but we don't have the solution. We have a nursing home here.
Oh.
It's one thing to have cloth diapers for your baby.
Yeah.
It's another thing when we have all the
Yeah.
older people. So
Yeah.
that's a big problem, and all the plastic
Yeah.
they use in the nursing home.
Yeah.
So that's just a problem about my mind. It's much bigger than, it's a special.
I think there's a place for plastic, to be really honest. I think sometimes there is.
It needs looked at, all the
Yeah.
plastic that gets thrown away.
What about the plastic they make to decompose now? It's not really plastic. It's decomposable. It's an alternative to plastic. That's a good point.
Other things that we had were practicing good fuel practices. So, trying to drive at a speed that's, you get good gas mileage. Together travel. So when you're going into Plymouth, trying to run all your errands at once instead of taking 5 trips that week. And we also talked about not only getting your food in containers and trying to avoid that practice, but then also when you're storing food at home, trying to use, the reusable kind of saran wrap type product and the reusable Ziploc bags and those kinds of things that they make now.
Yeah. Yeah. If you still have, that's good. Yeah. If you have a Ziploc bag that still has life in it, save it for when you travel on a plane and put the stuff in the bags that might blow up in your luggage. And, I never throw one away unless it's ripping, I think. All right. Who's ready to talk?
One of the few ones we had that doesn't overlap with other people is to elect leaders that are going to overcome this inertia regarding a lot of these issues. And we also had pick a couple days a week where you just don't drive and bike or walk instead. And shop at farm markets so that you don't get shrink-wrapped produce.
Ah, yes. Yes. Because at some point, we have to wade into the political mess, I guess, because a lot of decisions that are above and beyond an individual have to be taken by government units, like recycling. Everybody is using solid waste district recycling, I presume. We are. So that has to do with the fact that it's a program being supported by the governor, and on it goes.
Well, you mentioned this one, Cheryl, but I remember I went to Ball State also.
Oh, yeah.
And studied natural sciences, and I remember them saying, it'll stick with me forever, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down.
Yeah, there you go.
Now, of course, that's only going to be at home.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it in your public places. Don't worry, Lindenwood flushes.
Yeah.
But seriously, I remember it from years ago. That's what wastewater. Plus, I remember they used to put a 2-quart container of water in the tank. Because the tanks are too large. Like in Europe, if you go to Europe and you go to the bathroom, there's a choice. If you have a small button that you can press for your yellow material, and you have a second
that's
one
true.
because it uses more water. You don't need as much water to flush some of that down. And we've not yet come up to that standard like they do over there.
Yeah.
But the only other one that I think that we mentioned that you might not have is to check your food ingredient labels. I know that here we're trying to do that, Cole. I know you guys are working with that on a daily basis, trying to make sure we don't have corn syrup, things like that. I was not aware until this morning about the palm oil problem.
Yeah.
So that is something I'll start looking for and not buying anymore, but didn't know it until today. So thank you.
Thank you. That was a good list. Did I? Oh. Yeah.
Most of ours were mentioned already, but we did say maybe we can wash things fewer times, like our cars, unless it's salt on there, what's a little bit of dirt. Even our clothes, depending upon our odors. More than once, or if there was last more than once. We don't necessarily have to put everything in the dryer. Get those racks and take it out of the washer and
all
put
that.
on racks to dry. And fill your house with plants. Lots of plants to help them.
Oh, there's nothing like drying your sheets outdoors in the it's a real treat. And you save a little electricity, and then you get in bed and there's the smell of the outdoors. So, okay, I think there's 2 still groups.
We thought maybe a little bigger picture, but better use of trains, for passenger.
Oh, yeah.
Electric trains. Obviously, the whole electric vehicles reduce fossil fuel use. We also had living more simply. And then on an agricultural deal, we looked at, we talked about grid sampling. In other words, just putting fertilizer where it's needed as opposed to,
Everywhere.
whole field.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, most of the farmers in our area are doing the grid sampling now. And it's really a wonderful thing for water quality, too. Gosh, who wants to spend money for fertilizer that you really don't need in spot A, but B needs a little more? And I'm glad you said that electrical cars reduce fossil fuel. They don't eliminate it because you're plugging your car in and that's electricity, which is being made, but it's not putting it into the atmosphere like there are scrubbers on coal burning facilities. That's wonderful.
Everybody said pretty much what we were going to say, but I would say, if anything, help small businesses out instead of going to Walmart to buy that. Go somewhere else and help the mom and pop shops.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. Walmart has its place, but I think that was wonderful. I'd almost sort of like to keep these lists of yours so I can make one great big list. I think in just the last few minutes, I wanted to make a couple more comments about climate changing, because it seems like an intractable problem. It seems too big to get a grip on. Because the solutions to this problem will change our entire way of life and economy. It will. And so it's a lot easier to deny it is even happening. Honestly, I'd like to deny it. I hope I'm wrong, but this is the way I put it to people. There's a horse. You've got a horse race. We have Hoosier Park down in Anderson, so we go out and watch the horses sometimes. And let's say there's a horse running that has 95-1 odds of winning. And all the other horses make up the rest of the odds. Which horse would you bet on? Because climate scientists all over the world, hundreds of people, have given us a 95% chance that the increase in temperatures we're seeing around the world is due exclusively to human activity. There's a 95% chance that that is true. Would you bet on that, or would you bet on the 5%? And if we're acting as if the 5% chance that this is not due to human behavior, if we're going to base big decisions in the future on that, we're going to see some catastrophes. 90% of the population live on or near the coast. 90%. And in Indiana, if you get on Purdue's website, Purdue, pretty credible source, wouldn't you say, Purdue? They have a website where they are monitoring climate change here in Indiana and making predictions about what we can expect in the future. More floods, more dramatic weather events, which might mean some blizzards along the way, because what happened a couple of weeks ago is a polar vortex. Why did the polar vortex happen? Because the northern Atlantic waters are so much warmer than they used to be that there was no barrier, and the North Pole literally slipped off the North Pole, climate-wise, for about a week. So climate changes can affect the weather in ways that may not be consistent. I mean, we could have an uncharacteristically cold weather pattern, but on the other side of the world, it's hot as heck. My family live in England, and they had the hottest summer on record last summer. When we were having some cold days, they were burning up. So I just like to remind people, when you're making a decision, realize that climate change does affect the weather in ways that are not normal.
I think it was unfortunate in the minds of scientists that they started calling this global warming years ago. That they should have called it climate change a long time ago.
Years ago.
It isn't just the warming. Because Because then you hear these people who don't believe in climate change. Well, I'm going out to shovel my global warming right now, my 3 feet of global warming.
Yeah.
They, you know, it's just unfortunate, I think, that they started with the global warming.
Any other comments? Oh.
You know, there has always been climate change, but on a different scale. You know, there were glaciers down here at one time, and repeated times in geological history that there was climate change. But so people sometimes point to that and say, well, that's just what's happening. It's the normal. But how much more rapid is this?
We've not
than the otherwise climate change would have been.
I know. That's why the climate scientists think that it's human caused, because it is more rapid than anything in the past, except for maybe the asteroid impact. That was pretty rapid. But I had a thought and it's gone. Did anyone else want to say something about? Oh, good.
If I could just editorialize on the recommendations, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I really like that. I think it was Barb pointed out about the farm markets.
Yeah.
And it gets to what we're trying to get at with integral ecology, and I think the Pope is trying to get at, is that yes, we need to recycle and reduce single use and all that kind of stuff, but that alone is not like
it's not
ecology.
enough.
It's seeing that as a part of the whole system. So, you know, seeing an agricultural community where a lot of the products are going to processors or middleman corporation is, you know, it could be an environmentally efficient operation, but if your organic food is coming from California, that money is leaving the state, our products are leaving the state. What are we doing to keep the money circulating so that we have people in Argus, we have people in La Paz, we have people in Donaldson, looking after their neighbors, going to church. All of those things won't happen unless we demand that we have this local food produced for us. And I think another thing that she also mentioned was getting involved in politics in terms of solutions, because there's a lot of things that I can do at the end of the day. I'm just exhausted from trying to get my girls to bed. I don't have emotional energy to wash out another Ziploc bag. You know, and what difference does that really mean? You know, even though I still do sometimes. In that realizing that a lot of the decisions that are being made for us, not just in Washington, but in Indianapolis and Plymouth, have way more effects than a lifetime of me remembering to turn the light off.
Yeah.
Agricultural policy and the Farm Bill is huge as well for our rural economies. I mean, even in Indianapolis, they're making changes that affect the utilities. We've dealt with this here. The reimbursement rate for renewable energy that individual homeowners and farmers can get, as well as even something in Plymouth. We just were able to get the city to pass a complete streets policy that now states any renovations that are done have to take into account mobility for all users of all kinds, not just vehicles, and that affects the built environment. And that's not an environmental thing. Even though there's environmental benefits, it's about healthy living, opportunities for recreation, the chance that when my parents come, they can go on a bike ride with my kids without me feeling like they're going to get run over by a car. So people can get out into the parks and go through the parks. Those are the systemic, deeper things that we can be a part of, even when we get overwhelmed with individual choices. So I didn't mean to run.
Oh, no. I mean, I love that. I guess I want to say that we have an election coming up, municipal elections. One candidate left the park department without a superintendent for almost over a year and a half. Didn't even appoint one. The other candidate wants to build trails. Guess what? It doesn't matter what party they are to me. To me, it's very clear. The trail builder is the Republican candidate, and the do-nothing is the, don't tell us. But I think you're right. When we want to have big impacts, we have to look at policy level stuff. But I thank you for coming. You've just been wonderful. And if you want to leave your list, I'm going to compile it all. So, you're welcome. Perfect. Okay.